Yat eshik do shidinae. This is Melanie Yazzie, the host of Red Power Hour. Both Red Power Hour and the Red Nation podcast, which is hosted by Lakota historian and Red Nation comrade Nick Estes, are sponsored by Patreon. Support our Patreon. Go to patreon.com, the Red Nation podcast. And don't forget, we need to reach 2,000 patrons to launch our third podcast series, Native Reads, which will feature Indigenous writers interviewing other Indigenous writers. We have over 1,000 patrons to go till we reach this goal, so please consider supporting us today. I hope you enjoy this promo clip for this week's episode of Red Power Hour.
Just from what I understand of the origin in Haiti, it was the idea of zombies was created by African slaves who were basically making sense of and just like creating a way to understand their experience of enslavement, like you said, to be undead and yet not fully living, and to be trapped in the human form, I think is what the origin of it is. And so like I think it came from the anxiety of being knowing that you were under control of these people who and which is funny because when you think about it, like slave masters were the unhuman ones, right? And I think that's like we're talking about this kind of flip, because zombies were originally about the anxiety of being stuck in your body and yet being incapable of having agency. And
the thing is that we're not actually in a TV show, because being an academic is incredibly boring and nobody would ever want to watch that.
And nobody wins anything ever. And the stakes are incredibly low.
They are so low. They're so low.
So low.
I mean, you watch movies like with academics, they make our lives look like way cooler than
like
they
we're like sleeping with students all the time, or like we're alcoholics.
Or like Beautiful Mind, we're like solving all these like quantum equations.
Yeah, we're trying to become famous, and
or we have giant offices with like really nice windows that overlook beautiful things,
with like wood panels and shit or whatever.
Yeah.
I have a literal
like everyone works at an Ivy League institution.
Yeah, I have a literal like closet, and the building I work in is like literally older than the middle school that I went to.
The Native American Studies department at UNM is in an old dorm building. So, I mean, it's old as shit, but like at least my office is larger because it used to be like a double dorm room, and I have a closet. So even though the building is falling apart, at the very least.
Well, speaking of falling apart, let's get into zombies. So today we have a really special guest, somebody who I've actually wanted to have on the show for quite some time, but for various reasons haven't had on the show, because Cutcha is a very, very busy person, somebody who is in high demand. And so today we have
who's
Cutcha,
trying to declare email bankruptcy.
Yeah, I actually just learned that term. I'm going to declare email bankruptcy, and I'm gonna have you talk to Cutcha, who gave me that idea. But yeah, Cutcha Risling Baldy, an award-winning author.
Woohoo!
I can say that. But can you introduce yourself, Cutcha, and maybe talk a little bit about the award-winning work that you do?
Sure. So, hey, young killet, Cutcha Risling Baldy, ahoyet. I'm Dr. Cutcha Risling Baldy. I am department chair and associate professor now of Native American Studies at Humboldt State University in far Northern California, in the homelands of the Wiyot peoples, but very close to my own peoples, which is the Hupa Valley tribe. I'm also Yurok and Karuk. And my award-winning book is called We Are Dancing for You, Native Feminisms and the Revitalization of Women's Coming-of-Age Ceremony. And it really talks about the revitalization of women's coming-of-age ceremonies in my own community, which is the Hupa Valley tribe, and some of the work that many of the women did there to bring back our women's ceremony, which was really targeted by colonization and settler colonialism and extreme violence. And And I just wanted to tell a really great story about what the work that we did. And I wanted us to be the ones that told that story. So I wanted our voices to be the ones that talked about why that was important, and us to be the ones who said like what the impact has been. And it's been really fun. It's been a really fun project because the young women who worked with me on it have traveled with me several places to do their own presentations. And I have young people in my community now who are like, you wrote a book, I should write a book. And I was like, yes, you should. And so I like that part of it. I like kind of seeing the way that it's inspired our young people.
Yeah. And I think I met you back in the early or the late what are they, the aughts, I guess.
2010s?
Yeah, in ASA,
the aughts.
Yeah, the American Indian Studies. Is that
you mean like I would call it like yesterday, but now people are like, that's 10 years ago.
That was like a decade ago. Like
the aughts of yesteryear.
But yeah, I remember meeting you there and seeing your work, and it's been amazing to see you working in your own homelands, which we're going to talk about in this episode and how it relates to zombies. But before we get into it, I know Melanie and the Red Power Hour folks did an entire episode on zombies and Mad Max Winnebagos. But I wanted to just kind of ground. I did a little bit of research on zombies because I've always been interested in this, and it's not just a U.S. based phenomenon. So I kind of wanted to go into a little bit of background information and then talk about why zombies are really important for understanding settler colonialism. I think something that you, Cutcha, have kind of pioneered, for lack of a better term. I keep saying that, and I need to find a bigger.
Yeah, you need to stop.
I need to find a better word.
That is some settler zombie language.
Tomfoolery. So, just to give a brief overview, I think it's important to locate the zombie kind of phenomenon, I guess, cultural phenomenon historically within the context of African slavery. And specifically within Haiti itself. And so Haiti, for those of you that don't know, was a French kind of slave colony that also it was the first it became the first free state in the Western Hemisphere after an uprising during the Haitian Revolution in 1804. But at the same time, the zombie archetype, as it appeared in Haiti, kind of mirrored the inhumanity of slavery itself that existed from 1625 to around the early 1800s, and it was a projection of the African experience in the Americas, which was defined by relentless misery and subjugation, and the enslaved Africans within Haitian society. Which, by the way, Haiti is actually it's actually an indigenous name. It's I believe it's a Taino name for the island itself. And so after the Haitian Revolution, they renamed it back its indigenous name. And in fact, many of the Haitian revolutionaries also harken back to their indigenous traditions as well. And so the kind of the hoodoo and the voodoo religions that arose within the African tradition in Haiti itself are actually very much influenced by indigenous traditions. So I think that's important to remember. But the Haitian kind of version of the zombie was like a belief that the dying would release an African person back to Guinea or Africa, as it was known in their indigenous language. So it was kind of the zombie itself became like kind of a representation of the kind of drudgery of plantation life, basically. And so after the Haitian Revolution in 1804 and the end of French colonialism, the zombie kind of figure became really part of Haitian culture and folklore, and also the voodoo religion, and a belief that zombies were corpses reanimated, often to perform free labor or to be kind of recast as slavery itself. And in many ways, I think the cultural kind of read on that was like a fear of returning of a return to slavery to Haiti itself as well. So I think that's important to kind of point out. I think the kind of more contemporary version of the zombie phenomenon was really, there was like White Zombie, a film that came out in like the 1920s, I believe, that was about, it was very, very much racially coded. The white zombie was actually white, like glowingly white. It's a very bizarre film. Don't watch it. It's really boring. It's a lot of like poor white woman being attacked by dark men kind of thing. But nonetheless, I think in the post-war moment, zombies get a new life, and specifically by filmmaker George H. Romero, who was somebody that I grew up watching. I just introduced Melanie to Joe Bob Briggs' Monster Vision. She had no idea what it was about.
It changed my life.
Yeah, Joe Bob Briggs is amazing. I don't know if you've ever seen Joe Bob Briggs.
I haven't.
Oh my god!
Shudder. Do you have Shudder?
I do.
Okay, so he has a show on Shudder where he like walks you through kind of famous horror movies, but he has like the mind of an elephant when it comes to like the history of film. It's amazing.
It's like nerd alert.
After I listened to him for 10 minutes, I turned to Nick and I was like, dude, this must have been like in your adolescence where you learned all the useless facts that you're always spewing. So
some people had babysitters. I had
Joe Bob Briggs.
Joe Bob Briggs on the weekends. It's true. And like the thing, I was talking to my brother about this actually, because he was like, yeah, dude, they got Joe Bob Briggs, on Shudder. And, so he gave us his Shudder subscription. And so we've been watching like horror movies.
We've been binging it. Let's be honest.
And so like he pointed out something that I totally like agree with, is like when you're a child, like watching a horror movie is scary in and of itself, but watching it by yourself is like nearly unthinkable. But when you watch Monster Vision with Joe Bob Briggs, you're actually watching it with this like with Joe Bob, this weird Texan dude. Anyways, that's actually where I first saw a lot of the Night of the Living Dead, the two versions, the early version and then the colored version. And, this, as he even pointed out in that time period, that's actually where I learned about, this projection of, America's social ills, that kind of thesis of reading into these films of, kind of the consumer capitalism, right? And Dawn of the Dead, where they hole up in a mall, or the Vietnam War, or the idea of a nuclear apocalypse, right? And even tensions within the kind of Black freedom struggle at the time. And I think Night of the Living Dead has some of those elements. Like Ben, the character of Ben, is like if anyone has seen it, I love Ben. Ben should have his own film about just killing white zombies. But so today, zombies, as you so eloquently point out in your piece, your writing and your presentations on this Cutcha are always linked with the end of the world, right? A zombie apocalypse, a global pandemic, which is very relevant for this particular moment in time. We're actually living through a pandemic. And so the zombies in their American incarnation are very much encapsulated or essentialized within the Walking Dead, right, itself. And this takes place in Georgia. Which is bizarre because most of the zombies aren't black people, and most of the survivors aren't black people, and Georgia's like hella fucking black, which has always kind of bothered me about that film. But it's it's a desolate but like oddly idyllic landscape of camps, fields, abandoned motels, forest clearings, etc. And in some ways, it's almost like as if there's a peace and a subtle peace and harmony, except for the kind of terror that it lives within the survivors themselves, right? Who have survived this zombie apocalypse. And so as much as the zombie apocalypse is, dystopian, it's also kind of strangely utopian in some of the ways that it's represented, especially in The Walking Dead. So before I go any further in The Walking Dead, I want to turn it over to you, Cutcha, to talk a little bit about your work and like why you teach The Walking Dead in your Native American Studies classes.
Yeah, so this is based off a blog that I wrote actually when I was in graduate school, and I always tell people, like, if I die right now, I actually think in my obituary someone would write somewhere like she wrote the Walking Dead blog, like, because that's, of all the things I've ever written, that's the one thing that people will bring up to me constantly. So for people who tell me, like, why do people blog? Where does it go? I think more people have read this blog than most of my scholarly work. And have really sort of like, I think it's cited the most of anything that I've ever written. After it was published, it got republished on a couple sites, and then it was translated into like Swahili and French and Turkish, like all these different, like, and I don't know if they translated it correctly because I don't speak like Swahili, French, or Turkish, but they were like, I translated your blog and now it's all up. So I was like, okay, that's awesome. But I think, for me, the idea was always that, and maybe we all have like this uncle who, when you watch TV with him, he can find a way that what you're watching is actually about Indians, because there's no way that you're actually going to see Indians on TV unless they're like dying or they're ghosts or they show up for like one episode and then go away. And
like
so
the indigenous Joe Bob Briggs is what you're saying.
Like they just come in and they're like, here's my episode arc or whatever, or they get killed right away. I don't know. I have this blog I wrote called like, why do you keep killing Adam Beach, NBC? Because like he would literally show up and then die after 2 episodes. But when I would watch The Walking Dead, I really would just be like, this is the story about Native people. And the reason I thought that was because for me, I had heard so many stories about the gold rush from my own family, and my great grandfather, who was born at the tail end of the gold rush, who I knew when I was very young, would talk and write and tell stories about the gold rush. And he and several people who write about this area constantly referred to the miners as invaders, but they also called them the marauding horde. And they kept referring to them as a horde of people who would just sort of like move through. And I kept saying, like, they are zombies. Like they don't speak your language. They don't care about you. You can't reason with them. They view you only as something to kill, something that they're coming after. And suddenly you wake up one day and the whole world has changed. And you are faced with this marauding horde that just wants to kill you. And I was like, that's The Walking Dead. And they keep referring to the main characters in the first couple seasons. They only refer to them as the survivors. Like they don't have like a group name, but everybody keeps calling them the survivors. And I was like, that's it. We're the survivors. And I kept watching it through this lens of like, oh, look, it's almost like this way of kind of dealing with what does the end of the world really look like, and the humanity of it, because we root for the survivors. We root for the people who have to go through this. And then yet when I would be in classrooms, people would ask me these questions like, why didn't Indian people just, not get sick and die? Why didn't Indian people just leave? And I would just be like, like you don't think of that story as real, but you can watch The Walking Dead and kind of understand why people make the wrong decisions, why they might all die of the flu one season. Because there's like one season of The Walking Dead where they all die of the flu. And then nobody goes, oh, they must have weird antibodies and the zombies have a different kind of flu. You know what I mean? Like they don't kind of start to, the way we do with Native people. And so I was like, this experience. So I used to tell my students, if you want to understand what it was like to be a California Indian during the gold rush, we'll watch the Walking Dead, because in that show you get to see the experience of what it's like to suddenly have a bunch of people come into an area who just want to kill you, and you wake up one day and the whole world is different, and you're stressed out and you're sad and you're trying to survive and you have to make different kinds of decisions and you're fighting all the time. And this is what to me is a perfect example of how you like maneuver what this invasion truly looks like. And I can find parallels in so much of what's going on in the show. And the further I got into it, both the more frustrated, but also the more I saw that I think The Walking Dead itself started to think about, like that they're making social commentary on what is happening in our world. there's one time where they're all starving. This is actually my California Indian soul almost couldn't take it because they're all like starving. And they're making it very obvious. They're acting the shit out of this episode about how starving they are. And you're like, oh man, they can't even walk, right? Like they can't even see anything and they're dizzy. And the main character at the time, Rick, he has this little baby and they're all like, we can't walk, we can't eat, we can't think. And he looks down and he picks up an acorn. And oh man, I almost threw the remote control at the TV. I was like, you guys are starving and you're walking on acorns? Like, what the hell is your problem? Like, is there, like, what? And then he picks it up and he takes it into like this abandoned house or something. He's going to crack it open. And my friend was with me and she goes, he better not feed that baby. That acorn is going to give that baby the runs. Like, because you have to process acorns. You can't just like feed them to a baby. And I was like, is this a commentary on like how dumb these people actually are? Like, and then everybody kept going like, I was like, they have acorns just on the ground. They're starving. They have plants that surround them and none of them know how to break a fever, right? They're just like, and I thought you could actually go to the store and like get a book that's like, we've written lots of books actually about things you can do.
Why don't you read something?
But like nothing. So I would get kind of really, I think it actually is a really big commentary on like the separation of people like from land and knowledge that I would start to see even more. That would frustrate me because, but then people started asking me like, well, where do you think the Indians are in this show? Because there are no, okay, but this changes.
Cherokee flower.
Right. This changes later because I don't know like how many people actually watched the prequel to The Walking Dead. But in there's a whole Indian story, but like with The Walking Dead itself, there's no Indians in the show. And so people are like, where do you think the Indians are in the show? And I said, I actually think they're straight chilling. Like they're somewhere like straight chilling.
Red Crow Indian Reservation.
Yeah, they're in the Red Crow Indian Reservation.
It's like eating their acorns and they're being like, should we help these people? Like, nah, it's okay. They'll be fine. Right. Like just let them go. Cause really they have so much, there's so much richness around them. The season where they all died of the flu, I thought was hilarious too. But I also saw a lot of like watching human beings negotiate apocalypse was really important to me because it helped me as a Native person to access like my own great grandfather's stories where he's talking about the negotiating that he had to live through to survive, and that it wasn't easy decisions. It was not like we are all perfect people through the apocalypse, and to sort of like claim humanity in that way as Native people so that we don't have to navigate colonialism in a perfect way, that we sometimes make decisions based on selfishness or sometimes can't feel like we can't go on. I think that was a good reminder for me because I had listened to his stories almost as if he was a character more than a human being. And to be able to connect on a humanity level to people's actions in this period of time has always been important for me to be able to portray to other people who are trying to access this story.
So even though there aren't any Indians in The Walking Dead, I always felt like Daryl, one of the main characters, was kind of like the Indian, like the stand-in, like the white stand-in for the Indian, because he's like the tracker and he uses his like bow and arrow so efficiently. He walks around with like his cut off sleeve shirts. But did you ever think that Daryl was kind of like the stand-in for the Indian? Because he's like the most rugged and he's kind of the person who has the most common sense. Like, I feel like if Daryl encountered an acorn, he would know how to prepare it in order to ingest it.
I don't know, because of that episode where he does that whole Cherokee flower thing where he was like, I think Daryl would pick the acorn and be like, one time there were Indians that did acorn stuff and here's a fancy story about these Indians, and then like smash the acorn and throw it down, and you'd be like, wait a minute, Daryl, like,
or Daryl in real life would know how to cook meth from an acorn.
There was a couple of nods later. So if you watch past like the 4th or 5th season, there's another character who actually talks about Humboldt County and talks about the massacre of Wiyot people in the Humboldt region.
Wow.
And sort of like, and compares the experience that they're having to the invasion and the massacres, but then ends that story in a way that's sort of like, but then all the Indians, went away. So that's, like we're survivors like them, but we got to survive. We can't just go away the way all these massacred Indians. So it's a really it's like a weird nod to it, but doesn't quite get there, you know? So that was an interesting moment too.
I think one of the, I think the biggest takeaway from when I was rereading your blog post, but also when I've seen you talk about this before, is that this idea of apocalypse, and you quote Lawrence Gross, a native scholar, who talks about post-apocalypse stress syndrome. And it sounds very familiar to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. This is PASS, PASS, where he says that Native people have seen the end of their world, which has created tremendous social stresses in the current kind of moment. And I think of that in the way of like how the U.S. U.S. popular culture kind of imagines zombies as an end of the world. There can never be an alternative, to capitalism, to settler colonialism, except for the complete annihilation of the planet and the world. And I think what you're saying in this piece is that like they subconsciously are projecting an indigenous experience, indigenous genocide, like massive indigenous genocide and ecological destruction onto their own kind of like cultural fantasies, about like what the end of the world looks like, while just completely ignoring the experience of a place like like what you're talking about is like the California Indian genocide, where one couldn't even walk around and be indigenous in public for fear of getting just killed, and so I was thinking about that, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on post-apocalypse
stress syndrome.
Yes, that's what you say.
I mean, I think what Dr. Gross is really talking about too is this idea that like, we've seen the end of the world, but we are post the end of the world for us. So there is something after. And that when you think about how long it takes to rebuild, heal, and move forward, we should be generous in where we are at, because we're coming back from an apocalypse. So not to sort of say to people, why aren't Indians doing this, or why aren't they doing that? And he says it's important to understand that the effects of genocide do not just take place like in a personal manner with people, but this is like the entirety of structural systems are broken apart. And to be able to rebuild from that is something that we need to remind ourselves of, so that when people are saying, well, why do Native people still have these things that they're facing? How come, and why can't they just get over it? You remind them that like how long post-zombie apocalypse would you tell people to stop talking about it? Like, is that 20 years? Is that 150 years where you're like, that happened a long time ago? Like, sure, everybody turned into zombies, started eating people. But like, that happened a long time ago. We're way past that, right? Like, no, that becomes part of how you tell your origin story. That becomes part of what you understand about the rebuilding of your worlds. And so that's the same thing when we're talking about what is happening, say, like in the mission system, right? So now when people are teaching about the mission system, they're like, sure, there was a lot of bad stuff, but why do we got to keep talking about it? And you keep saying, like, because that's fundamental to understanding what's happening today. And I think that's what he's trying to get at, is like, when you're talking about the end of the world, there's not a point where you go, never mind that we lived through the end of the world. You're always like, no, that's something that's really important to understand. But he always centers, and I think it's important that he's always like, but the important thing to recognize in that is lived through, right? Made it through, survived through, like, that you have to remember that about Native people. It's not like there was the end of the world and then nothing. It was lived through, survived through, made it through, is our rebuilding through, our reconnecting through. Like, all those things I think are so important. And what I love about, I don't know, I've always waited for like Native people to be the ones mostly telling these stories, because one, what Larry Gross talks about, and what I think I tried to do in the blog a lot, was like point out that there's absolutely no humor in a lot of zombie movies or zombie like TV shows, especially The Walking Dead. Like there's no like real humor. And to me, that's why they suffer so much, because they can't like tell a joke to each other, or like joke about it. And I wait for those moments of humor. I just wait for somebody to be like there's an episode where Rick decides he's going to be a farmer. He suddenly is like, I'm a farmer now. I'm not going to lead this group. I'm a farmer. And he just wanted one person to be like, yeah, you're a farmer. You're living in the middle of a friggin' zombie apocalypse and you're a farmer. You know what I mean? Like to just kind of joke. They have no senses of humor whatsoever. And I think that that's really telling, because there's something really important about the fact that through all of that, through all of this genocide and like apocalypse, Native people never lost their sense of humor. They never stopped joking about it. I always tell people like I was like the elder Native people I know. First of all, Indian women tell some of the dirtiest jokes I've ever heard in my whole life. Like old Indian ladies have some of the dirtiest jokes I've ever heard, right? And then like they make jokes about everything, and the apocalypse is not off the table for that either. They have jokes about that all the time, and I think our laughter has been really important through that. And that's how I know that the shows and the films are generally not written by Native people, because I think they'd have much more like humor and sarcasm, and like they joke about the whole thing, as well as sort of talking about this deep, meaningful moment of like disconnection from peoples and what happens at the end of the world. And I miss that. I wish that was in there constantly. I tell a lot of jokes while I'm watching the show, but like,
Yeah, like when you were talking about this, I was thinking, I was like, well, if they just want us to get over it and they think that's taken too long, then it's like, then why keep coming out with seasons of The Walking Dead?
Yeah, exactly. Or like,
there's like what, 13 or something?
Yeah.
How many?
I stopped watching like halfway through.
I think the show ends in 2022.
Oh, God.
Yeah, like how many movies you have? Actually, I mean, I talk a lot about how like this like science fiction, horror, like zombie movies. I mean, it's really like, it's a deep like illustration of like settler colonial psyche. Because of the way that they portray people in it, you can kind of see where their psyche is, and a lot of it is fear that like, and everything is going to come and colonize them if given the opportunity, and that colonization is, I mean, they know like colonization is scary. They're like, this is scary. So like alien movies, that's always a deep settler colonial fear of colonization. Aliens are never going to show up and be like, hey, it's nice to meet you. Like, what do you know? We know lots of stuff. We should know stuff together. And instead, they're always going to come and try to like take your resources. So you always have to be willing to fight, and I was like, that's a really interesting kind of psyche moment for people, where you're kind of like, oh, that's where you're at. Like, you just think that's, and so in The Walking Dead, what's fascinating is that for them, post-apocalypse is not like a moment to rebuild in great, like, beyond capitalism or beyond like imperialism. Instead, they all become like super macho, like dudes fighting over resources, or like they don't know how to be in charge, so they just fight with each other. You're either going to go cannibal or you're going to go violent, right? You can't trust anybody. Like, and they think the commentary is that this is human nature. That like without laws, without like, systems, we all will just degrade into these people who want to eat each other. And and that reminds me so much of Jack Forbes and like his work on like, Columbus and cannibals, and this idea of like, well, who are the true cannibals, and the Waitiko psychosis of like settler colonialism. And I think like that's really illustrated in things like The Walking Dead, because they can't imagine beyond, we're going to either consume each other, consume the resources, right? And not be able to live together because we can't trust each other. And I was just like, this is really interesting that they think that's what we'll turn into. Like, and so there's actually a big message of like, if we don't have these systems of laws and governance, right? Because the guy who's the main character is a cop. Like that's his job before the end of the apocalypse. And he
never stops being a cop. Even though the United States has ended, he's like, there will be a future for cops.
And there will be authority, and there will, you know what I mean? And I have to be in charge, and like they can't, and then they never like, the minute they start planting things, the world goes crazy and everybody destroys everybody. I mean, it's just kind of an interesting take on At the end of the world, we'll all turn on each other. The only thing that keeps us from turning on each other is law. And I was just like, that's a deep, I think, settler colonial psyche of what they think, of how they think the world actually functions.
Yeah, I think just like a really nerdy, super nerdy observation. I read this study about how many generations it takes to domesticate a fox, like a wild fox, for it to become like acclimated to like, you know, the house and like human interactions. And it takes like 12 generations or something like that, 9 to 12 generations. And it takes like 1 generation, 1 to 2 generations of those domesticated foxes released back into the wild to like become feral again. And I was thinking, I always thought of this like when I was watching like The Walking Dead, as like it took like generations of them, you know, to be domesticated settlers, and now they're feral settlers, and now, you know, they revert back to like primitive Mormonism where the women start wearing, you know, because there's this scene where like all the women are like down by the water like washing the men's clothes. It's like they're like they have like so. Like they're thrown into the you know, the Hobbesian kind of like state of nature, you know, where it's like a war against all, and there's literally no government. There's literally like capitalism doesn't exist anymore. It's all just like crumbled, but they can't even build like an alternative to like.
They're just trying to rebuild what was already there before,
but a worse
on models
form
of like Christian heteropatriarchy and like settler ontology.
It's like, you guys are a bunch of losers.
Like, this is total anarchy, and like this is all you can come up with.
Or cannibalism. Like, really,
yeah.
You got 2 choices.
Losers, or just like intense violence.
Yeah,
all of it is upheld by violence in every single kind of like society you see them cycle through and experiment with in The Walking Dead.
Oh, but the other thing that I found really interesting is there is one season where they find this like community, and they're actually doing pretty well. They live kind of out almost on an island, and what you find out is it's a community of all women.
Of women, that's right.
All women. And then they come there and they of course destroy it. And the women are like, get out of here. They're like, get out of here. Why did you come here to just destroy us? Like, you're bringing all the bad things here. Get out. Because it's this community of all women that were like, we don't need you. And so then they end up leaving them alone. They're like, okay, we got to go because, you know. But I just think it's really funny that, I don't know, I always was waiting for the moment of someone to be like, does it have to be this hard? But I mean, I think there's a really great commentary about like they think that it's the worst people that will inherit the earth once all of this, like this falls apart or whatever. But what you see, like when you really think about the like post-apocalypse of like Native peoples and settler colonialism, I just think it wasn't the worst people. It was the people who were like, we have to be here for everyone and we have to help. And they were the people that stepped up. And I think that the experiences that everybody was having together, it bonded them more than like made them suspicious and hoarding resources. It like bonded them to each other of how we're going to make it through all of this together. And I will say one thing I found out, oh my God, I thought this was so fascinating. I went and talked about The Walking Dead and settler colonialism and Native people. And afterwards I was sitting down and this guy came up to me and he was like, you know, I want to tell you something because I really think you're very on to something here about this experience of what it's like to be a California Indian and to be confronted with zombies. Because when you read the archives of what it was really like to meet the Spanish people who were getting off the boats, like the Spanish soldiers, when they were first coming into this region. So they, of course, right, they had been on boats for a long period of time. They're sailing around. They haven't figured out they're supposed to eat lemons and stuff yet, right? So they're all getting like scurvy and like starving. And then their teeth are falling out, their hair is falling out because they, you know, they're all like living on these boats together. They don't know like, hey, we shouldn't like leave the pee on the boat. You know, like it's just all this craziness of how they don't bathe often, right?
Yeah.
And so they get off the boat and they start walking up like, we're here to, you know, claim this land. And what do you see? You see a zombie. Zombies. That's a freaking zombie. Like you would just imagine, you'd be like, what is happening?
Probably smelled like rotting flesh too.
No, they did. I mean, likely because they're sick, you know, like they're sick, like, and then, you know, they don't bathe. And that was the other thing that we used to say about the miners up in this area. Like they didn't bathe, they didn't brush their hair. They smelled really bad. Their teeth were falling out, right? They're covered in dirt. And I was like, and what is that? That's a zombie. That's walking around as like a zombie. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think that Indian people were just like, what is wrong? Like, what is happening? And then for Spanish people to write in their journals that Native people thought they were gods, I think is hilarious, because no, they didn't. Or at least the saddest gods they'd ever seen. Just like these poor things.
Well, they were probably like, they thought the looks of reverence. They mistook they mistook those looks of absolute horror
and revulsion
for reverence.
The shock.
Yeah, they were turning away because you needed some soap, bro.
I mean, they couldn't.
Water and some soap.
I can imagine they're like, they wouldn't look me in the eye, and you're like, they couldn't. They were just like, I can't look at this. This is so embarrassing.
Here's a fucking Tic Tac.
And a fucking hairbrush.
Yeah. Comb your hair, bro.
Oh God. Well, that makes me think. So right, last year, Indigenous directed, written, produced, and acted film about a zombie apocalypse called Blood Quantum, right? Came out. It's on Shudder, so people can go to Shudder if you have that and watch it. But I'm trying to think, you were talking about, like, what are some of the signals when you're watching something that might have been like authored or envisioned by an Indigenous person, right? Versus like a settler version of an apocalypse. And I feel like an Indigenous version of an apocalypse, which has a certain kind of futurity to it, right? It's the end of one world, but it's the beginning of another. And of course, you have to survive the beginning or whatever this new world or this new paradigm is. But I think a lot of what we talk about in like Indigenous studies, or like the role of humor, like you were talking about, Cutcha, just the way we tell stories, right, is that future, it is like the future is going to be built by the best of us and not the worst of us. But I don't really think that's the story that Blood Quantum tells. And I can't tell if it's because it's like very dude driven still. But how do you feel about Blood Quantum? Like when you first watched it?
Let's explain the premise of Blood Quantum a little bit. If you want to go through it. I think it's actually really, it's a really like, I know it came out last year, but it's like really relevant to this moment in time. It takes place in like a fictional Mi'kmaq fishing community on the bay.
Red Crow Indian.
Yeah, it's a fictional, it's like a Red Crow Indian reserve. Which is fascinating because like the Mi'kmaq are like actually getting attacked by
settler hordes.
Yeah, settler hordes right now who are destroying their lobster fisheries. But one of Jeff Barnaby he's a Mi'kmaq filmmaker. He did Rhymes for Young Ghouls, which is really great, and everyone should check it out. It's also super dark. It's very dark. Actually,
so is Blood Quantum.
Yeah, and that kind of darkness carries over into this film. But it took Jeff Barnaby over 12 years to raise the money for Blood Quantum because the film world is hella white. We talked a little bit about this on the episode with Jana, and she explained like how like certain films, Indigenous films, just don't get made because like white people own all the money, and so they only invest in certain things. But this took 12 years to raise money for. It's really well produced. The cinematography
is beautiful. The acting is incredible. The production quality. It's a really solid story, really good character development. And yeah, I think it has the same kind of darkness to it, which we can talk about as rhymes for young ghouls. I was going to say, young ghouls. But yeah, I think like Nick said, it's pretty important, I guess, for this day and age where we're living in global pandemic, where we're dealing with the notion of like racialized contagion. And the premise of Blood Quantum, right, is that I don't know, the implication is that like Native people of a certain blood quantum or higher are immune to whatever the disease is that causes zombification. And so it's majority just settlers, white settlers. I think it's set in Canada, who are infected. And so what has happened is that these Native people on the Red Crow Indian Reserve have blockaded themselves in against the zombie hordes. And in fact, there's like a reversal, like a societal reversal where any white settler who is surviving the apocalypse, can seek refuge within the reserve under the care and kind of the governance, I guess, of these native characters. But the story, I don't know, it devolves into competition over resources, and a lot of, I guess, like the quote unquote social plagues of like reservation life before the apocalypse still appear in the post-apocalyptic kind of era that the movie is tracing, and which is like alcohol and drugs are kind of part of the reason why the movie descends into chaos and like the Indians kill each other over a pregnant white woman. So yeah, it's an interesting story. We just watched it last night, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But like its commentary on settler colonialism is pretty fascinating.
I will say, I watched it for the first time kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, back when people had like hope and we're like, hey, this is going to be fine. We're all going to be okay. And this is going to take a good couple months and then we'll be back to our real lives or whatever. So watching it then, and then I watched it again a couple days ago because you guys said you wanted to talk about it. And this time I watched it with my husband, whereas before I watched it all by myself because I was really kind of, it's not fun to go to the movies with me now that I'm a full-fledged like academic scholar, because I'll go watch like a Marvel movie and be like, that is truly about patriarchy and the upholding of like imperialism in various countries. You know what I mean? And then everybody's like, that was Iron Man. And I'll be like, yeah, that's exactly what it's about. So I'm that person. I'll also give a lot of Foucauldian analysis about things now that nobody asked for. So like, I like to watch movies by myself. But I will say, like, watching it now, horror, I think in general, but an apocalypse movie about like a zombie plague that results in a reservation that has to barricade itself away to protect its own people, when my reservation right now is closed to outside visitors, trying to protect our people from COVID, and they are on a curfew, and we had to make considerations when we're thinking about the practice of our own ceremonies. And wanting to still be able to do some version of them and making those decisions right now, wearing all of our masks while we're singing songs, over a girl because she's coming of age, and social distancing. I was doing it a little bit ago with some people, and I was just like, gosh, like doing this ceremony at the end of the world, and then thinking about the way that my own people had to do that during settler colonialism. They had to make these decisions. They had to like say, it's dangerous for us right now to do this. So how do I make these choices about what I can and can't do and what's okay? But also like, what do I need to do? And then what does it mean that we'll all try to find some way to make it happen, even during the apocalypse, to make sure that this girl knows that she's important to us, knowing all of that. And then watching this movie again, I'll say it hit me pretty hard, like to watch the barricade go up, to watch the negotiations that they had to make as people, to know the fear of like, if we let this person in, what's going to happen? I don't know. It was a little bit different now. And I think that's why this moment is so important, because I think it allows us to kind of take a step back and be like, my mom keeps reminding me, like, our people made these decisions before. So we're doing it now, and we have to remember that they did this for us so that we could make sure that we still had our songs and our ceremonies. So we're doing it too. Like, we're doing it too. And that's where we're at right now. So that's what kind of like walking away from the movie at that point. But I will say, like, the one thing that keeps sticking with me in this movie is like, ultimately for me, it's like a giant movie about a dude that freaks out because he lost his penis. Like, that's like the
beginning of the end, right?
Like, really. So there's something really big in there about men and their dicks, like really, because that's that moment, right? And I was like, this is fascinating because
right?
Yeah, it gets bitten off by a woman that I think he was like trying to seduce, like, but like drug her, and then she becomes a zombie, and of course it's very graphic, like it's very graphic what happens. And then I was like, and that causes the end of the world. So really, dudes just need to like get over it, but they can't. And the whole whole
keep your dick in your pants.
Yeah, like for real. Like there's a time and a place. But that's kind of like, to me, I was like, that's another fascinating element for me in this movie, is you're kind of like, of course it comes down to that, right? Like, of course it
But
does. So.
I mean, to be fair, like that would have never happened had that woman been honest with Native people to begin with. But instead, she lied in the fact that she was infected and she was bit. I think there's like, I mean, just to be like, you know, like not to excuse what he did and what happened to him, but like that woman like lied. She like lied, you know, she lied at the health checkpoint that they had and she said, no, I'm not bitten. And then she was offended when she was, you know, asked a series of questions about whether or not she was forced to eat dogs or people. You know, that's actually, and that was kind of an interesting exchange between Joss, the mother, who's played by Elle Maija Tail Feathers. I don't know if I said your name correctly, but she's a nurse, you know. There's like all this weird, like the gendered thing also happens too, because there's like a
cop and a nurse.
Yeah, there's a cop and a nurse, and they're like,
the dude, the nurse is the woman.
There's like this whole like tension thing between them. But anyway, she asked them a series of questions, and you know, do you eat dogs? Do you eat people? And it's like those are all things that like Native people are accused of doing. Some of which is true. Not gonna lie, but
I'm sit next to a dog eater.
I know. I was like, you're allowed to say that, Nick. That's one. That's one thing you're allowed to say. The rest of us will just go, whatever Nick says.
But you know, her character was interesting because she gets that white woman. She's like this white hippie chick. She gets introduced at that moment in time with another guy and a girl, like a child who's bitten, who actually turns and they have to kill. But then he is so selfish and stupid that he decides to kill himself. The white guy decides to kill himself once he's in the sanctuary because he's so upset that his daughter died or whatever. And then he like, you know, then he unleashes the plague within the inside the camp itself. And so it's like, if it wasn't, you know, for this one dude, you know, kind of breaking ranks and then like turning on the entire camp, it would have probably been like a white person that they were just trying to help, who were just doing dumb things. Like they're like, oh yeah, like I got bit, but I'm going to stay in this camp and, you know, ride it out for a bit. Or yeah, I don't know. There was a lot of,
well, I mean, Lysol, right? Who's the one who got his dick bit off. Who's kind of like the villain.
Poor Lysol. That's how he's known in the film.
Yeah.
Lysol, poor Twilight actor.
What character did you play?
Yeah. My dick got bit off.
My name was Lysol and my dick got bit off. No, but he takes the I forgot the character's name who bit his dick off. When she transitions into becoming a zombie, he unleashes her so she'll kill all of the other white people in the camp. It's not so much that he unleashes her to kill like the other Indians, of course, because they're immune or whatever. I mean, I guess they can get eaten, but if they get bitten, they don't turn. But he wants to just like eradicate all of the white people. And so to save the sanctuary for indigenous people, which is like, you know, when we were talking in Red Power Hour last week or the week before about like the way that Indians are treated in the genre of horror, and even in kind of like the subgenre of zombie thrillers, like we're constantly erased, like you said, Cutcha, like we appear for one episode, like in Lovecraft Country, for example, and then we're like brutally murdered or whatever, like a plot device. We don't actually have like agency or actual character development. And so we were talking about how, like, what would Indigenous horror look like? And there would be like a really strong element of revenge in Indigenous horror, I think. I mean, there could be like a better kind of utopian notion or like a futurism about like the best of us taking over and building a new society, right? Which I think would be kind of a cool kind of decolonial Indigenous approach to horror. But there definitely would be some like reverse kind of like pain inflicted on the settler hordes in like an Indigenous controlled universe, like in a post-apocalyptic kind of scenario, like that exists in Blood Quantum. And so in that sense, I think Lysol is like a protagonist of revenge, of like Indigenous revenge, in a way that makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, I also, I mean, I
too, like an asshole.
I mean, I do think there's some moments in Blood Quantum that I was like, this is definitely a Native film. Actually, I think really made for Native people, because So, well, first of all, Gary Farmer's in it, so automatically you're like, oh, okay, never mind, I'm on board. But he gets some of the best moments, and I don't know if that's just because he's really good at those moments, or because if you're gonna have Gary Farmer in your film, you're like, okay, I got to give him some of that. But some of the most like humor moments come from him, and there's a scene where they're talking about how they like protect the bridge, because like the bridge is where all the zombies are figuring out how to come over and try to get in to their sanctuary. And then they're like, don't worry, he's figured out a way to take care of that problem. And it's hilarious. Like, it's just this giant machine that like chops them up. And I was like, yeah, that would be an Indian solution. And he just sits there and like watches them all walk into it and just like laughs and tells jokes. And I was like, yep, that it would be exactly kind of like how I was just like, oh, I got to go turn on the snowblower today. Like, cause they're all coming to walk in, you know what I mean? Like I got to go refill the thing. So there's moments like that where I was like, this is a very Indian film made for Indian people. Cause there would be that kind of like jokey way of dealing with it. And kind of telling jokes about like your day, like how was work today? And you're like, I watched 25 zombies walk in here and get ground up. You know what I mean? Like, that's how my day at work was. So I do appreciate that part. I think
Uncle Gary. Yeah. There's a lot of uncles. There's a lot of uncles in this film.
And then like even the dad, I think the dad is a great character. And of course he's got the samurai sword, right? Which I think it's funny that appears in several different zombie films. You always have like at least one person who's kind of who has a samurai sword to do the fighting. And they're kind of like the warrior in a way, but also one of the most efficient. They're usually the most like efficient warriors anyway, because that happened in The Walking Dead too. You have a person with like the katana and but I do like the dad character because what I love is he never sort of questions that this is happening. You know, a lot of people would go through like a period of time of like disbelief where it's like, it's definitely not a zombie apocalypse, right? This is definitely, and instead he's like, set him on fire. Okay, give me this. Okay, now we're in a zombie apocalypse. And I think that's an amazing way of just being like instead of the moments of like, this is not happening, I refuse to admit it. He's like, we're in a zombie apocalypse now. What are we going to do about it? And I appreciate that about his character too.
Yeah, he's like the wise old Indian dude who's just like, I gutted this salmon and it's continuing to move. Such is life.
Yeah. I mean, that was actually a fascinating, kind of thing, because I think they suggested in the animation at the beginning that there was some kind of like industrial beginning, like there's several like origin stories for zombies. Like one of them is kind of like a supernatural kind of phenomenon, and one of them is like this. It's kind of been suggested in George Romero things of like nuclear spill and chemicals that bring people back to life, or the living or the dead back to life. And in this one, it's like it's salmon. The salmon are the first zombies in the film, and it's suggested by the animation at the beginning that there's some kind of like industrial development that goes into this river or this lake, and then the salmon become infected, and you can't eat them, this and that. But then like towards like as a story kind of unfolds, a dog gets infected, like a res dog.
Res dog.
Yeah, the poor res dog comes back to life, and then they have to burn him. But then like what was also fascinating about it is that like I read some of the reviews to prepare for this interview, and some of them were like, oh, they reversed the old like biological agents scenario that like diseases just killed off native people and blah 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 blah. And it's like, actually, and now like the zombie virus or whatever is like killing off all the whites. But if you really really think about it, it's not actually the virus that's killing off white people. It's actually like white people's dumb decisions that's killing off white people. Like that was like why the disease spread. Like white people weren't like biologically like superior to indigenous people when they came here, right? They created conditions of war.
They didn't even shower.
Yeah, they didn't even soap. The word soap is an Arabic word. Like
fundamentals.
That's where it comes from.
Immersing your body in water so as to clean yourself.
Scrub. So like in this world that's created, this zombie world that like, we see it lapse for 6 months. indigenous people are immune. I don't think it's like, I don't know if the blood quantum is like really talking about like actual like blood quantum, because they never really say like why indigenous people are immune. They don't say if it's like biological, they don't say if it's supernatural per se, but nonetheless they're immune. They get bit several times. But the white people who die in the film die because they make dumb decisions. Like that's just like, that's the pure fact. There isn't like this like, oh, now the indigenous people are biologically superior. It's like, no, like all the indigenous people in the film collectively act, even with other white people, to like fight the disease. Whereas white people go like Mad Max, right? They're like, we're just like road warrior. It's anarchy. Everybody, you know, versus everybody. Fend for yourself, lie, you know, cheat, steal, all those kinds of things. And that's why they die. You know, that's why they die in the film. Like that one woman who, you know, bites off Lysol's dick. The reason why she dies is because she lies. You know, she lied about her condition. She lied to the people who took her in and trusted, you know, that she was, you know, not infected. So I think like there is a social commentary less about like the kind of causes of zombieism than there is about like white society as like fundamentally like irredeemable and Native society as like a survival.
You have to ask the question. Sector. You have to ask the question though too, like when you're thinking about, so in this situation of like this zombie apocalypse, they have this throwaway line where they say, "Don't eat the fish, but is it the deer and the moose?" I think is what they say. The deer and the moose are okay. So they're doing hunting. So they're like, you can go out and hunt. The deer and the moose are okay. Don't eat the fish. And I find that really fascinating because of what happens, like what's going on in our area with like dams and dam removal and what's happening to our fish. And our fish are getting sick and we're trying to protect them. And so this idea of like, they've poisoned the things that they need in order to survive, right? Like settler society poisons the river, poisons the fish, and then comes and says like, help us. And you're sort of like, a lot of this is caused by the fact that we could have had a zombie apocalypse and clean water, and then a lot of us would probably be a lot better. You know what I mean? Like, but you had to also like poison all the water. And so I think part of it is like this really interesting commentary on like, I think the reason why the end of the world would be so bad is because on top of it, people have been destroying the land and the water and everything else. When really we should be able to have access to like at least water, at least fish, at least all these things. So there's something about like the repercussions of their own decision making of like, we poison the water, we poison the fish, we poison the land, and then now we don't know what to do because now we're poisoned. And what are we going to do about it, right?
What's also interesting is that like, you know, the first like 20 minutes of the movie, you see, what's his name? The cop, the dad, the main character.
Trailer.
You know, you see Trailer.
Michael
he's just
Grey
like,
Eyes,
he's like the tribal cop.
beast.
Michael Grey Eyes being sexy beast with his braids swinging in the wind. But, you know, he's like cruising around the res and it's just like, he's like, fuck, I got this guy over here and I got these people over here. Oh, this white woman ate her baby. Now she's trying to kill me. Got to smash her head in. It's like, and like Gary Farmer's so just like drinking, you know, and he has these like hilarious moments where he's just like drinking and like saying ridiculous things. Like you were saying, Cutcha, he really steals the scene every time he's in one. But it's like, even after the apocalypse, it's still just the res. It's like nobody is super alarmed. Like the native people are not super alarmed. Like you were saying, like the grandpa's like, oh, this is an undead fish. Well, probably better do something about it. You know, they're all just like chilling. And then even when they barricade, Gary Farmer, like he just adjusts, Uncle Gary just adjusts so quickly to like churning up zombies on the bridge. Still drinking every day, having a good time. But yeah, it's like it might be a commentary on like, you know, Indians already living their post-apocalyptic best life, meaning their worst life on the res. And it's still the same, like in the post-apocalypse.
Well, the thing also I think is funny,
losing their shit.
It's like we have to remember timeline. It's 6 months later. So like this is the end of the world, like 6 months. And this is what I always love about zombie movies is when they start talking about timeline and they'll be like, it's been a year. And I'm like, it's been a year and you guys are going cannibal? Like, I don't understand why you're doing, like, it's been 1 year, like, and suddenly you're all hurt, like destroying each other. So in this movie, it's been 6 months. And then these white people show up in like rags. Like they're not dressed very, you know what I mean? And you're like, it's been 6 months. Like this is like, like, I'm sorry, but like really like 6 months and this is how much you fall apart. So there's always that commentary about, I think something my grandma told me growing up where she would, because my grandma lived through the Great Depression and I would ask her about it. She'd be like, I don't know, we barely even noticed. Like, because we were already like living in the way that suddenly people are having to live, like waiting in line for food rations or like looking at the ways in which we spent money or like making our own clothes, right? So she was like, I barely even noticed the Great Depression when I was a kid because it was kind of the way that we lived. And I feel like it's kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, well, we've got a house that we can still live in. We've got a space that we can still take care of. We know how to like go and hunt and do things. We know how to like help each other and that sort of thing. But what I do think, what I was fascinated by was that, and I think it was a commentary trying to be made by the film, or maybe I'm reading into it because I do too much of this work, but there is this commentary about the traumas that exist in us before. They are not forgotten because of the apocalypse. In fact, they are compounded because the way you're going to respond to it is also based on the traumas that you've had from this before time. So that's what we need to understand is it's not like you suddenly go into survival mode. Your traumas are compounding you and they all have traumas that they're carrying with them. So they can't be perfect responders because they're coming from these like trauma places that they have to sort of be informed by. And you can see kind of the lasting effects of them not addressing that trauma. And I was waiting for kind of a conversation about that, like this idea of like, well, now what are we going to do? The bleakness of it is one thing, but I always think there would have been at least one person who's like, you know, I got a prayer for you that you got to take forward. I got a song with you that you got to remember, you know, like I got a way that you're supposed to say good morning to the sun that you got to make sure that you pass on to your, you know, the baby that you're going to have. Because I think that's what our people did. The work that I have done, I realized like when they were living through the apocalypse, when they're living through the gold rush, they would just be like, I can't remember everything, but I can remember this song. I can remember this like way to make this thing. I can remember that. And then they would make sure to tell somebody so that when we came around later and we were like, we want to do this dance, but we have to figure out how to put it back together. There was someone who was like, oh, my grandma taught me this song. My grandma taught me this prayer. My grandma taught me this thing. That was the thing she could carry forward. And I think Native people, in my view of like how they navigate these moments, are constantly going like, I can't do everything, but I can do this. And I'm always going to be thinking about there's going to be a time post this moment that we're going to want to remember and recover and revitalize. So let's make sure we pass that on. And I didn't see any of that yet. So I don't know. Maybe that's like the next movie, but I was waiting for that moment somewhere.
So was I.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. Like
even at the end.
Yeah, the ending was like really depressing, and I feel like there was some kind of like parallels with other films and storylines. Like one film that came to mind was Children of Men, which is about like the end of the world and like nobody can have any children anymore. And then this one woman, she's an immigrant or migrant woman, actually gets pregnant. And the end of the scene or the end of the entire film is like them being like kind of shuttered away on a boat, and she gives birth to, you know, or I don't know, I can't remember if she gives birth or not, but it reminded me of that scene because they like go through all of this horrific stuff. And in this situation, it's to save, I can't remember the white girl's name. Becky, I don't know. I'm just making that up. It's to say Becky. This is a Becky who's pregnant with Joseph, or Forrest Goodluck's baby. And there's this whole narrative, like at the beginning, like about like potentially having an abortion, this and that. But there's like really no sense of a future in this film at all. Like there's no, and it kind of feels a little bit like Children of Men in some ways in that sense, but like, it's like a typical like narrative arc to have like, oh, the pregnant person or whatever, or like they'll be like, oh, we're gonna, I thought like there's kind of this signaling that Michael Grey Eyes' character Trailer is gonna shack up with his old love, Joss, but that never happens. He ends up getting his intestines ripped out in a really disgusting scene. But the end of the entire film is Joss, the mother, and Joseph fleeing with the pregnant white woman who got bit, and then she has the baby. It's like really dreary. They're out on the lake. She has the baby, and the baby's fine. It's not a zombie baby. She doesn't eat the baby because she doesn't die yet, and she's afraid to touch the baby.
You sound disappointed, Nick. Like you were like, she doesn't even eat the baby. Like,
yeah, and I mean, well, like what was jacked up is like the opening of the when the zombie plague really takes off.
You see a white woman eating a baby.
Yeah, you see a white woman eating a native baby. It's fucking crazy. Like I was like disturbed. I was like deeply disturbed.
Wait, wasn't she pregnant and she ripped that baby out of her own body and
ate it? She ripped it out of her own body and ate the fetus. Yeah. And I don't know what that says. Like I kind of like am like, is this just gratuitous violence or what? And then the dad is like so traumatized. They're like, oh, he must just be on drugs. I was like, no, dude, like he just saw like a fetus get ripped from his white girlfriend's body, and then she like decided to devour it. Like what the like I don't know what to make of any of it. I like when we watched it last night, I was just kind of like, okay, like what does this mean? Like what it, like I really don't know. I don't know what this means.
What happens? I mean, is that the guy who at the end brings the boat so that they can all get away? Yeah. Isn't he the one in the end who? Yeah, that was his wife. What happens to him?
Who?
Oh yeah, he's not in any of those. The final scene where she gives birth and like they're. Oh, you're right.
Does he just stay? Like, or did he have a second boat?
Also, the really big guy, the one that you partied with a couple of times, Nick. Oh. One of the actors.
He got Brandon Oaks. Yeah,
Brandon Oaks. He gets like speared through the chest, but he's still alive when they leave the shores of the reserve. So there should be.
Is there another boat?
5. There should be 5.
No, the other one was like on fire.
And then he brings the boat. Remember, he brings the boat, and he's like, "Ta-da!" I'm like, "Your last minute save." And then those 3 get in the boat, but then we don't know what happens to the guy that brought the boat. Anyway, I feel for that guy.
Yeah, he's cool. He's a cool dude. He's just like a bro. I think the apocalypse worked for him because he's the only guy that got sober. I guess like if you saw like, oh god, that scene was so gross. I don't even want to rehash it, but I guess if you've seen what he's seen, it it'd make you.
I would say even in the realm of like zombie movies, Blood Quantum was super graphic. It was intense.
Yeah, it was a good. I mean, like all in all, it was like one of the better zombie films I had seen.
And I will say, if you haven't seen Fear of the Walking Dead, like Michael Grey Eyes is the actor that is in the Indian story. He's the main Indian of the Indian storyline in Fear the Walking Dead too. So he's got a good genre going on.
Is that the prequel?
Yeah, that's the prequel to The Walking Dead. And so they have this whole, like, there's one season where they're dealing with Native people and it's kind of like about land, and like there's this land dispute between Native people and this other group of people, and it's kind of, and I kind of was like, this is going to be really super fun and great, but I couldn't, and then I just lost interest. It wasn't for me, but I've heard people say that it gets better, so I feel like I should rewatch it again because they're like, no, it gets way better. Whatever happens between the Indian people and these land people coming in on their land.
Weren't there also like Indians protecting a casino in that sci-fi show Zombie Nation?
Oh man, that's okay. If you want to laugh more than you've ever laughed at a zombie show before, you should watch that episode. I was crying. I was laughing so hard, and also I did a blog about it. It's a photo essay of just like moments. It's so bad that, but what here's the part I love, and this is my audience here. This is my audience of two, you two, because you will identify with this. So in Z Nation, it's about this group running from a horde of zombies, and they run into this Indian reservation, and they get brought to the guy who's like, he's like the big mean Indian guy. Right. And he's like, I'm mean because I'm skeptical. And he comes out and he's like, we will not accept this group. These people running from zombies, they're going to bring the plague. They're like settlers. And he's like talking. He's like, they're like settlers. They're bad people. They like he's like, they got the psychosis. He says the Waitiko psychosis. They bring badness with them. So he's like the Indian skeptic. And then they were like, who are you, man? And he introduces himself, and then he goes, I know this because I was a Native American studies professor before the zombie apocalypse.
Oh my God.
I forgot about that.
It was the best moment I've ever experienced in a TV show. I was like, yep, that would be all of us. We would be like, no, you're out. We are the Indian studies professors. We do not accept anyone. And then he ends up being angry Indian guy for like the whole episode, which I understand, right? Because he knows everything. Like, he's like, I've done all the studying. I know what's about to happen here. But he is a Native American studies professor. I love it.
So there's a practical role for getting a PhD in Native American studies.
There is definitely
yeah.
You'll be in charge of everybody.
India Casino.
And they always ask, what kind of jobs can you get?
Oh, and then the way that show ends, man, is they decide. So they have all this really messed up ways that they talk about the zombies. But one of the things is they're trying to figure out what to do about the horde. And then someone says, did you ever hear about what they did to all the buffalo? Or no, they said, are zombies as stupid as buffalo? That's the line. Wow. Are zombies as stupid as buffalo? So they decide that they're going to run the zombies off the cliff into the Grand Canyon. And my response was, sorry, Havasupai, because you're about to get rained on zombies. So they like decide to run them all into the Grand Canyon, and then you watch this whole horde run into the Grand Canyon. There's a Pocahontas character that like starts flirting with this little white kid. Oh, there's a medicine woman, an Indian medicine woman who literally forgives this white guy for settler colonialism. She tells him like, I forgive you. God. For all the genocide.
I remember that.
There's even reconciliation. I haven't watched Z Nation in a while. I don't even know if it's still on the Sci-Fi Channel, but I'm going to have to watch that episode.
And like the white guy like becomes native, right?
Oh, no. He does a bunch of drugs with the medicine woman and then trips out. And then they somehow get stuck in a net. I don't remember how, but they get trapped in a net. And then he's able to like go outside of his body and become like this white, like, thing outside of his own body that fights the people that trapped him in the net and then frees them because he's on these drugs or whatever. Anyway, it's a whole thing. It's a whole episode.
Wow, in the end, all of the cliches wrapped up in like a 45-minute sci-fi episode.
Oh yeah, but like one of the cool things is there's like, they're post-apocalypse, right? But so they can't. But the casino still has power.
Yeah.
So. Of course.
And wasn't like the head boss in a suit or something in cowboy boots?
Yeah. And then like he wins the jackpot right before the zombies take over the casino. Yeah. Which I said was a commentary on like, you're not going to win any money from us until the end of the world. So, but keep coming and giving us money. That sounds good. But yeah, he wins the jackpot and then the building goes down. But there's still power there. Oh, and then you'll appreciate this, Melanie. When they show up, all the people who are running from the horde, right? They're like a mixture of all kinds of people. They're like holding up their hands, and the woman goes, "Yatahe, Yatahe," like to the group of people.
I think it's the best scene like ever is when Dances with Wolves, when Dunbar like comes upon the Indian encampment, and they're like, "Wasichu, Wasichu," which means a white man.
And then they hand him a bar of soap.
Yeah, and then they have him a bar of soap. And they like take a bath, white man.
I mean, people were asking me, they're like, well, are you offended that, they said this, they tried to say hello in Navajo? And I was like, I don't know. I think it's a pretty good, like, you're kind of running pretty good and you might hit a Navajo somewhere. So maybe it's a good way to open it up, like just to see. You're like, maybe there's a Navajo.
Yeah, Navajos are everywhere. That is true.
You got a pretty good chance.
Wow.
They're not just at Window Rock.
That's how we're going to wrap up this conversation.
Yeah.
Just going to dogpile on Navajos.
Well, they're in the Grand Canyon region, so
that's true. They're always in X-Files too. I just did an episode with Lou Cornum, who's Navajo, and it was funny because playing Navajos never actually make it onto the big screen. Like,
this is true.
Like Albert Hosteen from X-Files is actually played by Floyd Westerman, Red Crow, the Navajo medicine man in what was that movie called? I'm trying to think of it. Natural Born Killers was actually played by Russell Means. So, it makes sense because you guys aren't even at your own reservation that you'd be out wandering around. You need Lakota and Dakota people to play you.
Rude.
But I think this is a good place to kind of wrap up a bit. Thank you for taking the time for Cutcha to come on the show. This was a great conversation. There's still some more. Like, I think we should do a follow-up conversation. I think we should pick out another horror film or something. We could just do like all the Stephen Kings. We should just do all of them.
Oh my God. I mean, we've talked a lot about this in Red Power Hour. The Stephen King Industrial Complex and the Indian Burial Ground. Come on.
Yeah. There's
Dreamcatchers in all of his movies.
That's true.
All of his stories.
It's true. Stephen King is a loser.
Is that what you're going to title this episode? Everybody will think they're coming for zombies. They'll be like, nope. The title of this episode is Stephen King is a loser.
Yeah. Well, it's true though. He's like literally made an entire career and like extracted wealth from dead Indians. Like that's literally what he's done. Like that's his whole like oeuvre. But anyways, where can people find you, Cutcha? You're on social media, you're social media queen. But where can they find you and what's the best way that they can support your work?
I think the biggest, so I have my own website, right? It's CutchaRislingBaldy.com. That's where I like put my writing and my publications and stuff up. And then I'm on Twitter at Cutcha Baldy. That's where I tweet about really important things.